The sun lazily set over the chaotic expanse of parked cars in front of the Target in San Jose, California. Emily, exhausted after a day of work, pushed the cart with one hand. While the other, she held tightly the hand of her little son, Luca, 4 years old. The child, with his lively and curious eyes, was attracted to every sparkle and bright color in the supermarket. While Emily lingered to choose the fruit, Luca stopped in front of a candy display, captivated by the images of gummy bears and lollipops. Emily looked at him for a moment, smiling at his innocent gluttony, then turned to get a bag. It was only a moment, a blink of an eye. When she turned back, Luca was gone. Panic gripped Emily's heart like an icy vice. She called his name loudly, scanning every corner of the department, but there was no sign of Luca. The crowd of people around her seemed like an indistinct blur of alien and indifferent faces. Desperate, Emily turned to the supermarket staff, who immediately alerted the police. The search started in a hurry, involving officers, sniffer dogs, and volunteers. The Target parking lot was combed inch by inch, while Luca's photo, with his blonde hair and blue eyes, bounced on the news and social media. The hours passed, turning into an endless nightmare. Emily couldn't sleep, eat, or think of anything but her child. She prayed, imploring the heavens to bring him home safe and sound. After 36 hours of agonizing waiting, an unexpected twist. A Target cashier, suspicious of a man who was entering and leaving the supermarket obsessively, had followed him undercover. The man had entered the parking lot, approached a car, and tried to open the back door. The cashier, sure it was a kidnapping, had called the police. The officers who intervened on the spot had blocked the man and found Luca hidden in the back seat of the car. The child was unharmed, but scared, still under the effect of a sedative that had been administered to him. The joy of finding Luca was immense. Emily hugged her child, flooding him with tears of joy and relief. The pain and fear she had experienced in recent days turned into deep gratitude for having found him safe and sound. The man who had tried to kidnap Luca was arrested and charged with kidnapping. The investigation revealed he was an individual with a criminal record for crimes against minors. The trial against the man was a tough test for Emily. She had to relive every moment of terror, every anguish, every shattered hope. But her tenacity and her desire for justice gave her the strength to face her tormentor, to look him in the eye, and to testify against him. The man was sentenced to 20 years in prison, a sentence that could not erase the pain of Emily and Luca, but which represented an act of justice and a warning against pedophilia and the exploitation of minors. The investigation revealed an even more chilling detail. The man was a follower of a satanic cult that practiced black magic rituals. He had tried to kidnap Luca to sacrifice him during a macabre ritual in the hope of obtaining dark powers. The discovery shocked the community. People were in disbelief in the face of such cruelty and obscurantism. Emily, already tried by her experience, found herself facing a new nightmare. The thought that her son had been one step away from a horrible death tormented her day and night. Despite the pain, Emily found the strength to react. She joined a group of people who fight against satanic cults and black magic. Together, they began to raise public awareness of these dangers, often underestimated. The story of Emily and Luca is a reminder not to underestimate the danger of certain individuals and certain practices. It teaches us that evil can also hide behind the most banal faces and that our vigilance is essential to protect our children. Furthermore, this story reminds us that the strength of motherly love and solidarity can overcome even the most difficult challenges. Emily and Luca survived a nightmare thanks to their courage and the support of those who helped them. Their story is a message of hope for all those who have experienced traumatic events. The cold night air enveloped the Target like a shroud. The once bright neon lights now emitted a dim and ghostly light, creating long shadows that writhed on the walls and floor. The aisles, once bustling with customers, were now silent and empty, except for the distant hum of a refrigeration machine that pulsed rhythmically in the darkness. Ethan, the night janitor, walked around with his metal cart, checking that the doors were closed and the cash registers were turned off. He was a middle-aged man with a face marked by fatigue and years. His eyes, once lively, were now dull and opaque, as if he had seen too many things in his life. He had worked at Walmart for almost 20 years, and he knew every corner of that supermarket like the back of his hand. Every shelf, every aisle, every product had its place in his memory, a mental map that guided him in the darkness of the night. As he walked down the food aisle, his gaze was caught by a shadow moving quickly between the shelves. He stopped, his heart pounding in his throat. A shiver of cold ran down his spine. Not the icy cold of the night, but a deeper, more sinister cold, as if an invisible presence was watching him. The shadow stopped and turned towards him. Ethan held his breath. He was a bearded man with long, dirty hair that framed his face like a wild mane. His yellow eyes shone in the darkness like those of a wolf, emanating an eerie and disturbing light. His face was emaciated, marked by deep wrinkles and a thick, unkempt beard. He wore tattered, dirty clothes, which emanated a pungent odor of sweat and mold. Ethan suddenly felt vulnerable, alone in that maze of silent aisles. His cart creaked ominously with each step, amplifying his sense of unease. A lump of fear formed in his throat, making it difficult to breathe. What are you doing here?" Ethan asked with a trembling voice, trying to remain calm. The bearded man looked at him with a sinister smile, revealing yellow and ruined teeth. "I am just waiting," he replied in a hoarse voice, as if he hadn't spoken in a long time. Waiting for what?" Ethan asked, increasingly worried. "The right moment," the bearded man replied, with an enigmatic tone that chilled Ethan's blood. Ethan didn't understand what the man meant, but he knew it wasn't a good thing. A sense of terror gripped him, as if an imminent danger was threatening him. He turned and tried to escape, but the bearded man was right behind him. Ethan ran through the dark aisles, the bearded man chasing him like a fury. His cart overturned, hitting the shelves, knocking over cans and boxes that resounded in the silence with a deafening din. His panting, mixed with the creaking of the cart and the noise of his footsteps, creating a cacophony of terror that echoed through the empty supermarket. Ethan felt the bearded man's hand grab his shoulder, an iron grip that paralyzed him, as if a grip of ice that had blocked his body. He turned and looked him in the eyes, terrified. His yellow eyes shone with an evil light, as if he were possessed by a demonic force. The bearded man pushed him against a metal shelf, with inhuman strength that crushed him against the cold sheets. Ethan tried to defend himself, but it was like fighting a bear. His hand, calloused and ruined by work, clenched against the bearded man's powerful arms, trying in vain to free himself from his grip. The bearded man looked at him with a cruel smile, as his bristly beard rubbed against Ethan's face. "You have no escape," he said in a hoarse voice, as if he were pronouncing a death sentence. Ethan felt the terror rise in his throat, a wave of panic that was about to overwhelm him. His vision blurred, his muscles weakened, and the pressure of the bearded man's hand on his throat became increasingly strong. In a last desperate attempt to save himself, Ethan grabbed a can of preserves that had fallen to the ground during his escape. With all his strength, he lifted it and hit the bearded man on the head with violence. The bearded man staggered back, stunned by the blow. Ethan took advantage of this to free himself from his grip and ran again. The pain in his shoulder was excruciating, but the adrenaline gave him the strength to continue. Ethan ran out of breath, the bearded man chasing him like a madman. The aisles of Walmart turned into a labyrinth of shadows and terrors, where every corner hid a danger. Ethan felt the bearded man getting closer, his heavy breathing blowing on his neck. He knew he couldn't keep running forever. It was only a matter of time before he caught him. Desperate, Ethan looked for an exit, a way out of this nightmare. He turned around and saw a half-open door at the end of the corridor. It was an emergency exit, his only hope of survival. Ethan ran towards the door with all his strength, the bearded man now only a few steps away. He threw open the door and rushed outside, into the darkness of the night. The fresh air filled his lungs, making him feel the life coursing through his veins. He had survived. He looked back, but the bearded man was gone. He had disappeared into the night, as if he had never existed. Ethan stood there, trembling and terrified for a few minutes. Then, he walked to his car and drove away from the Walmart, leaving that nightmare behind. Ethan never went back to that Walmart. That night, he had seen evil in the face, and he had only survived by a miracle. The trauma of that experience haunted him forever, leaving a deep wound in his soul. He never told anyone what had happened, too afraid to be believed. He simply changed jobs, finding one that didn't require him to work at night. But every time night fell, Ethan would think back to that bearded man, his yellow eyes and his cruel smile. And he knew that, in a dark corner of his heart, the terror of that night would remain forever. It was a seemingly ordinary Thursday afternoon at the Target supermarket in Springdale, Arkansas. The Anderson family, consisting of John, Sarah, and their 10-year-old twins, Emma and Ethan, were doing their weekly shopping. Among other things, John had picked up a pound of ground beef from the butcher's department, oblivious to the macabre fate that awaited them. That evening, Sarah prepared dinner with the ground beef, cooking meatballs and sauce that the whole family devoured with gusto. It seemed like a normal family dinner, happy and carefree. However, a few hours later, the first symptoms of illness began to appear. John was the first to feel nauseous, followed by Sarah and the children. The symptoms quickly intensified: stomach cramps, vomiting, and high fever. Terrified, they called an ambulance that rushed them to the emergency room. At the hospital, the diagnosis was terrifying: salmonella poisoning. The ground beef they had bought at Target was contaminated with the bacteria, which had caused severe intoxication in the entire family. The doctors put them under observation, administering antibiotics and IVs to combat the infection. Fortunately, after a few days in the hospital, the Anderson family recovered. However, the traumatic experience had left them deeply scarred. Not only had they suffered terribly from the poisoning, but they were also disturbed by the thought that the contaminated meat could have been purchased by other customers, unaware of the danger. The authorities launched an investigation to uncover the cause of the contamination. They inspected the Target supermarket and seized several batches of ground beef. Laboratory tests confirmed the presence of salmonella in these samples. The police questioned the employees in the butcher's department, but none of them admitted to contaminating the meat. The investigation stalled for several weeks, until a small detail caught the attention of the investigators. One employee, a young butcher's assistant named Kevin, had been absent from work the day the contaminated ground beef was sold. Furthermore, he had recently been in mourning for the death of his mother, an event that had deeply troubled him. Subjected to more intense interrogation, Kevin confessed to his crime. In the grip of grief and anger at the loss of his mother, he had decided to take revenge by contaminating the supermarket's ground beef, with the intent of causing the death of innocent people. Kevin's plan was diabolical and cruel. He had injected the salmonella bacteria into the ground beef, certain that it would cause serious illness to anyone who consumed it. His madness had led him to commit an act of food terrorism, with potentially devastating consequences. Kevin's confession shocked the Springdale community. The Anderson family, still recovering from the poisoning, found themselves facing a new wave of pain and anger. How could they forgive a man who had caused so much suffering with such a vile act? The trial against Kevin was swift and severe. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison for attempted multiple murder and food poisoning. His sentence could certainly not erase the pain of his victims, but it served to send a signal of justice and protect the community from future tragedies. However, Kevin's confession did not end the nightmare for the community. Further investigation revealed an even more chilling detail. Kevin had sent the contaminated meat not only to the Target in Springdale, but also to other supermarkets in the area. His aim was to amplify his act of terror and cause as many victims as possible. The discovery panicked the surrounding communities. The authorities issued a food alert and seized the contaminated ground beef from all the supermarkets involved. However, it was difficult to estimate the number of people who had already consumed it. In the following weeks, several cases of salmonella poisoning occurred in various neighboring areas. Not all cases were linked to Kevin's plan, but the possibility that the contaminated meat had caused other suffering was agonizing. To this day, it is not known for sure how many people were poisoned by Kevin's contaminated meat. His act of madness caused pain and suffering to many families, leaving a deep wound in the community.